week, the TransformTO plan, which I'll make reference to as I make my remarks about resiliency in general. We are here at the ferry docks because it is, I guess, a place where it's obvious one of the side effects of the flooding that we've seen on the Toronto Islands, namely that the ferries are effectively not in service and not taking people over to the islands because they're closed. We saw in a report yesterday from the General Manager of Parks, Forestry and Recreation that there has been a cost to the city already, mainly through lost revenue of $5 million. And in fact, the cost going forward of actually reconstructing what has been damaged, and we're not clear yet on what exactly has been damaged on the island because the water is still covering a lot of it, is going to be many millions more than that. But in the short term, of course, it has also jeopardized people's homes. It's closed beaches and park spaces. It's had a significant impact on businesses over there. And I think this is an example of a natural event that happened largely because of a strong winter runoff that has raised water levels, but that is probably going to become a more frequent type of event as we go forward. And that, combined with extreme weather, is becoming the norm rather than the exception. I'm told by James Dan that the water levels had in fact started to come down quite nicely until the significant rainstorm of last week, when again that contributed to just slowing down the process of seeing us being able to recover. And we've seen, of course, in parts of British Columbia, Quebec, Eastern Ontario, and here in Toronto, the impact that we can experience of these kinds of events that happen, natural events and or storm events. And it shows why we need to take a thoughtful and decisive action so that we can make the cities more resilient, all cities, but we're of course concerned here about Toronto, and try to reduce as best we can the cost and the impact of these kinds of events. Yesterday, I was very happy to stand with Prime Minister Trudeau and Premier Wynne to announce our collaborative investment in flood protection in the Portlands. Making that investment today will save us from facing astronomical costs in the future should a flood occur. And it represents a forward-looking approach that I'm proud to say will also have a major transformative impact in many other ways on the waterfront in terms of future opportunities for business, for residential, and for open space. I was explaining, because I think it wasn't necessarily clear to everybody who doesn't follow this as we have to do, that not only would we not be able to proceed with new parks, new developments, new residences, new businesses on the Portlands if we don't do the flood protection work, but that any of you who have seen, or any people that have seen the time-lapse example of what could happen if we had a storm not that much worse than the one we had a couple of Julys ago, could see one of our neighborhoods in South Riverdale flooded to the extent we normally are used to just seeing on television in pictures, where we can't imagine such a thing happening here. So it's that kind of forward thinking that was exhibited yesterday, where we're making the investment to make the plans to stop that kind of thing as best we can from happening, that brings us here today. I'm very pleased to tell you that the city has recently hired a new Chief Resilience Officer, Elliot Capel. And Elliot, as you've probably figured out by now, is the gentleman standing right beside me. This is a new position that is created to lead citywide resilience building efforts to help Toronto prepare better for catastrophic events of one kind or another, and the stresses that are increasingly a part of city life, not confined to responses to natural events or to storms or anything like that. The position is funded through the 100 Resilient Cities program pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation. To earn this partnership, Toronto was selected. We had to compete for this from among 1,000 cities to join a global community that is building urban resilience, and that is taking advantage of the resources of the Rockefeller Foundation, but also taking advantage of the learning they can have from each other. And when I championed, as I did, our city's application to this program and was interviewed by the Rockefeller Foundation, I spoke about my desire for Toronto to lead when it comes to these kinds of important initiatives, not to be caught saying, I wish we had done this or done that, to be better prepared for what may come, but to be in a position where we could say that we were leaders and that others could learn from us. I want to say thank you to the Rockefeller Foundation for their partnership and for choosing Toronto, and for making it possible, quite frankly, for us to welcome Elliott into the Toronto Public Service. I can assure you we had many highly qualified people apply for this position, and that in his case he has a significant international work experience in climate change strategy and resilience principles, and as a result became the perfect candidate for us to select to participate in 100 resilient cities and all that will come from that in terms of benefits to the city. Elliott will work with the city staff to support and to centralize our approach to resilience and tie our efforts together in a comprehensive way. As is true of many areas of government endeavour, we have many people working directly or indirectly on things that might be put under the category of resilience or preparation for this kind of thing, but they oftentimes, it seems, don't meet each other or talk to each other as often as they may. And by having somebody like Elliott, it's going to be able to bring those people together and to make sure that our efforts to respond to these events and be ready for them is coordinated across the city. It will also mean, I think, a better and more coordinated approach on our end to working with the other governments. You will all have taken note of the fact that in their respective budgets, both the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario have set aside substantial pools of money to deal with some of the efforts we can all make on climate change, but it's unspecified as to how that money will be allocated, and we're wanting to be at the front of the line, not just because we're Toronto and we're big and so on, but because we would like to be innovative, working with these other governments to find ways to share in these investments as partners and to have a positive effect on a number of aspects of climate change. That also means we have to make sure that our climate change TransformTO plan prioritizes the work that will give us the greatest immediate impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and the reduction of those emissions. Because when it comes time for us to apply for the money, for example, from these other two governments, we have to have specific initiatives we're going to undertake where we can demonstrate to them that these will have the desired effect of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's going to be a big part of what we will discuss next week. And Councillor McMahon will be championing this at the City Council meeting. I am very hopeful that Elliott, as an expert in this, can take an active role in making sure that that report, TransformTO, which I am confident will be approved by City Council, can have a targeted impact over both the short and the longer term in order to help make sure that we use our resources and the resources of the other governments to target those resources wisely and productively. As a city, we need to set ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase Toronto's resilience so that we can address the very real social and economic challenges of the 21st century. We forget sometimes that these kinds of impacts when it comes to things like housing and economic opportunity can have a much broader impact than just what you see with your eyes in terms of a beach being damaged or a particular building or roadway being damaged by these kinds of natural events. TransformTO provides us now with a framework that will allow us to make decisions that can lead to a low-carbon city that is healthy, prosperous, and equitable. There is no time to waste here. I'm glad the report is coming forward. I'm glad we will deal with it even just before the summer comes about so that we can get to work on it and to put Toronto in a leadership position. We will continue to show leadership on this, and I think an important part of that is going to be the presence of a Chief Resilience Officer and the TransformTO plan, which will, together with the will of the City Council and the City Government and the partnership with the other governments, make sure that Toronto is better prepared to deal with these kinds of challenges as they come forward in the future. So I'm pleased to welcome you, Elliott, and I thank you very much for signing on. And we're all looking forward to working with Elliott and taking his advice as an expert and moving forward both with the plan for TransformTO and other initiatives that he and other parts of the City Public Service advise us are necessary and appropriate. So we are happy to take your questions today on this and on any other matter that's on your mind.
The way the plan is currently configured isn't the right set of actions, or is there a concern about the cost for listening to that?
My main concern is that it's a very broad plan that no matter who was looking at it, I think would agree it's not possible to do everything at once. All the things that are listed there, I think you have to look at taking these things on. But I'm not going to judge that now. All I'm going to be supporting is the notion that we should take the elements of the plan and do something that the report itself doesn't do, which is to sort of say, all right, for energy retrofitting, what investment are you going to make and how much return are you going to get in terms of actual greenhouse gas emissions in what period of time? And the same with the other measures that go through in the report, the move to more renewable energy. how fast can you do it? How much is it going to cost? And what difference will it make? One of the things that doesn't get as much attention in the report as it probably should is the move that we're making, of course, to become more self-sufficient or more sufficient when it comes to public transportation, and what impact that will have on the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, traffic being one of the biggest sources. So I'm really just focused on the fact that we make sure we can, as we go about attacking this problem, do it in a way that produces the most benefits fastest for the amount of money that we're going to be in a position to spend. And I think that's work that's very important to be done as you embark on a project like this that is so broad-ranging. Did you want to make any comment on that in terms of just the plan? You've read the plan. I don't want to put you on the spot, but...
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mayor Tory. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I mean, in response to your comment, I mean, the plan is comprehensive, it's ambitious, but achievable, so I like that balance, and I agree with the Mayor, basically.
Other questions on other matters or this? Yes.
Question about security, the July 1st big party happening down at Court Square. We had some experts on yesterday talking about, lackable security. There's just certain things you can't, make everything secure all the time. That's the reality of life. What's your take on how it's all going to play out and what's in place security-wise now through police?
I will say to the people of Toronto that I had a full briefing from the Chief of Police and some senior officials last week, and I'm satisfied, without getting into the details, because you normally don't tell people what security measures you've put in place, but that I'm satisfied that they are doing everything that is responsible and appropriate to make sure the people of Toronto are kept safe. I updated in talking to the Chief as recently as this morning to just see if there was anything more that I needed to know or any other measures that he was discussing that needed to be implemented, and he said he was just proceeding with the plans as we had discussed. So I think the real message to the people of Toronto is this: they should be vigilant and they should watch for people who look like they're engaged in activities that they shouldn't be, but at the same time they should also be confident that we have excellent intelligence services in this country. We have an excellent police service here which locally implements safety measures they think are in the best interests of keeping people safe at large events or just on everyday life, and that I'm confident that's exactly what's being done.
Down at the Ash Bridges Woodbine, and how long until we may see that beach restored to what it was?
The beach is kind of fixing itself a little faster than the island, and as I mentioned at the outset, the water had begun to it built up, and so the water levels will take some time to go back to where they need to be in order to have the flooding stopped and to have even to have repairs begun. And so I would say that there's really no news that's any better with respect to the timing of the island reopening, and we're still looking at very late into July, and as we said earlier on a few weeks ago, there's even a possibility it could go later than that, and we'll just have to watch this thing on a day-by-day basis and see how the weather is. I also want to just make clear, because I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I think it's important that we clarify these kinds of things. The report that came out, a lot of the media reports I heard said that there were $5 million in damages. When you look at it, the report actually talked really just about lost revenues from the ferry service and so on that totaled up to those kinds of numbers in the millions of dollars, and it talked about some of the additional costs that our very capable staff have been put to in just having all the overtime and so on to fill the sandbags and whatnot. The cost of fixing what's been done by this high water level is going to be much more than that. At the beach alone, the current estimate would be a seven-figure number of, say, $1 million at the eastern beach to fix that, because we can now see it, because the beach is now visible again. We still can't see what's happened underneath the water at the island, and I think we're going to be looking at many millions of dollars that will have to be invested to fix that, but there's really no ability to even give any estimate of that now because the water's still covering a lot of the places that have been damaged.
Can you elaborate on what this new position will entail and more in the short-term and long-term?
Well, I'll let Elliot comment on that as well. But again, I look to it. One of the things I've realized now that I've had a chance to be at the in a position of leadership in this government for some time is that, I guess, with a lot of large organizations, there are lots of resources and lots of very capable people with a lot of ideas and challenges in front of them that never seem to get together. They work in different departments of the government, and they never get together and sort of say, all right, well, let's prioritize things. Let's look at what is going to be the most effective. And more importantly than any of that, let's work together to actually get it done. And so right now, if you said, well, do we have a resiliency plan that sort of says, all right, well, here are the top 5 things we can do, and then the next 5 after that to make sure the city is ready for events that may come, to make sure we remedy things that are obvious holes, because when something like happens at the island, there are undoubtedly going to be some lessons learned from that, since it hasn't happened in anybody's recent memory. And so there's now going to be somebody whose job it is, working with all the other officials in the government and with all the other governments, to say, okay, we've learned the lessons, we've done up the priority list, now let's do it. And he will be pushing us, I hope, to do it as well. So, I mean, I see it that way. It sounds more like it's about process, but sometimes that's what's missing. What's missing oftentimes is the ability of people to sit down together, somebody to convene those meetings, to draw up the priority list, and then to push, people like me and other councillors and other public servants to actually get some things done. So.